Hi, I am Asim from NEC Labs, and I am excited to present our paper, Learning Higher Order Object Interactions for Keypoint-based Video Understanding. This is joint work with my colleagues from NEC Labs. Video understanding in computer vision is often measured by one or more tasks such as action recognition, visual tracking, as shown in this slide. Using methods that structure the intermediate space are often very helpful because the structure allows the model to learn important information easily. Second, this also makes the learning and inference very efficient. This talk is about understanding videos from large amounts of keypoint data and how to structure it efficiently. In the first half of the talk, I'll talk about keypoint-based tracking that was presented at CVPR 2020, and this is then extended to keypoint-based action recognition, which appears at Structured Video Understanding Workshop in 2021. There is a renewed interest in pose-based methods. First, there is lots of new hardware, whether it is Wi-Fi based or RF based, that can provide these key point estimates. For example, for applications like virtual reality and fitness, extra sensors are being used that extract this pose information. Second, keypoint based data also visually appears to be more privacy friendly than RGB data. The first problem that I'm going to talk about is to tracking multiple persons through time. We look at pose-based tracking, which is essentially capturing human joints at every frame and mapping them over time. The video here only shows key point estimates. We find that existing approaches for key point-based tracking are often poor in modeling temporal relationships. There are a large amount of ID switches, and often they use complex convolutional pipelines, which makes them very computationally expensive. As a result, we propose a method that only uses key point data. The goal is to use the motion of human described as key point trajectories to track them through time. For example, in the video shown here on the left, we can see that key points provide sufficient information to track these two people as they cross over. In this paper, we talk about keypoint-based tracking over the post-track dataset, which is a large dataset with more than 150,000 poses, which was introduced in diverse settings for 2D multi-person settings. In this slide, I provide a quick high-level overview of the entire approach of multi-person post-tracking. For using public datasets like PostTrack, we do need to extract keypoint-based information from the data, and we cannot use the sensors that we described in the previous slide. This is done either using a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. The top-down approach uses a separate detection step to identify person candidates. Then, a single person pose estimation step is performed. Bottom-up methods are more efficient since all key points are calculated in a single step. However, top-down methods are more accurate and more commonly used. Next is the matching step, where again there are few approaches, such as an IOU-based approach, where an IOU overlap is calculated between different bounding boxes of the persons. Next is an optical flow approach, where flow poses are propagated from one frame to next. And finally, there are graph convolutional-based approaches over the joint data. This is fast, but it requires capturing high spatial relationships, which requires a high resolution. The last step is to match scores to assign track IDs to poses in the scene, and here often a greedy algorithm or an Hungarian approach is used. This slide demonstrates our approach. The first step is the key point estimation step, where we use an existing network HTC cascade to extract person bounding boxes. Next is the HRNet to detect the key points, and we refine these key points using a refinement step, and that is our first contribution. The second contribution is the temporal matching step, where we use a transformer. The transformer is modeled like an entailment network, where the goal of the model is to perform a binary classification if the two poses follow one another in time. And then the final step is the ID assignment step, where we simply greedily use the maximum scores for each ID. And this is the overall pipeline figure. So in the rest of the talk, I'll first talk about the tracking part and then the action recognition piece. So I'll now talk about how we tokenize pose information. We first extract a pose, then downsample the coordinates into 24 by 18. We also flatten it to 1D, and then we add positional encodings, first for the joint type and second for the segment, which basically tells us how far apart each pose is from the current time step in this pose. So this figure shows how a original image is transformed to a basically tokenized information. We take this tokenized information and this slide shows us how this tokenized information is obtained more formally. Once we have the tokenized pose data, we simply pass a pair of poses into the transformer and perform a binary classification as to whether these two poses follow each other. This means that we send a pose t and t minus d, where d is a fixed hyperparameter. We call this task as a pose entailment, and it is inspired from entailment tasks where there is a premise and hypothesis and one has to predict if the two sentences follow each other. These two figures show a visual illustration of matching pair and a non-matching pair on the top. And on the bottom is our transformer, which only takes the input whether the two poses match. Another contribution of the paper is Temporal OKs that is used to improve the estimation step from HRNet. This is done before the transformer. Top-down methods suffer from missing bounding boxes as well as imperfect bounding boxes. We use the box detection from adjacent time steps in addition to the one in the current time step to make and improve the pose predictions. This table shows our results. We obtain a very high MOTA score and we were number 1 on the PostTrack leaderboard for 6 months between 2019 and 2020. Now we extend the tracking information that we obtained from the previous step and extend it to perform action recognition. The key hypothesis is that we can only use the key point information for action recognition. The key contribution here is to use the object key points in addition to human key points. The object key point help us compensate for the loss in context which happens if we just use person key point data for action recognition. There are still open questions as to how do we obtain sparse key point object representations and how do we structure them in the intermediate space to solve this action recognition task. The figure on the left shows the key idea of this workshop paper. Here, instead of just using the key point person data, we are also using this object data which shows like a bow as well as a board, which suggests that perhaps an archery action is being performed, and this would be slightly more difficult if we just use the human key point information. Diving into more detail, here we talk about how to get sparse key point representations. We take the RGB information, which is the video, and we again use HRNet to get the person key point data, while we use the Pavlidis algorithm to obtain the object data. How do we obtain class agnostic object key points? We take an image, we take a mask, and then we follow the Pavlidis algorithm. Given an object detection segmentation mask, the Pavlidis algorithm performs a contour tracing, and this is followed by an equal distance sampling around the contour to get the desired object key points. This figure shows the tokenization for the action recognition task. Similar to what we saw for the tracking step, here we obtain a large number of person tracklets. So additionally, we also have a timestamp token for different persons. When we visualize this information, we can see that we are, for the action recognition task, we are taking Keypoint-based tracklets to perform a final classification output. And this is our overall architecture, wherein we sample the key points to obtain human and object key points, and this is fed through the KeyNet, which is basically a hierarchical transformer network that is able to combine and learn higher order actor-object interactions using just key point data. And here are some results over our data set. We find that using object key points is able to compensate for the loss in context, improving the performance. In the paper, there are additional results over JHMDB and Kinetic 16 datasets. So this is the summary. Keypoints are proving to be an excellent modality for video understanding. We find that structuring the intermediate space with a focus of attention allows us to learn semantic video concepts over just keypoints. In this talk, I talked about KeyNet, which uses object keypoints to recover from loss of context in keypoint data that allows us to solve the general action recognition task. And we find that KeyNet achieves these competitive results in tracking as well as for action recognition. Thank you.